everyone, I'm Liz Eggleston and I run Course Report, which is a resource for students who are choosing a coding bootcamp. So if you haven't looked at Course Report yet, this is my one shameless plug. I do it in all of our videos. You can use our directory to find schools that fit your learning style. You can check out our blog for interviews with students and instructors and founders at bootcamps around the world. Plus we've got application tips and virtual classroom tours like this one. And we've been doing these for a while and we'll continue doing them, but we've been sharing a lot of tours of online classrooms because as you know, a lot of boot camps are moving online in 2020 and did that really quickly and effectively. So we're sharing as many of these online classroom tours as we can so that you can do your best research. So today, Matt Lane from Rithm School is here to walk us through the Rithm School online classroom. Thanks so much for being here, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So usually the Rithm School classroom is in San Francisco in California, but because of COVID-19, Rithm School's moved entirely online. And Matt is gonna walk us through the differences between Rithm School online versus in person. He'll also share his screen and give us a tour of the Rithm School online classroom. And he's gonna share some advice for students who are really trying to excel in an online boot camp and actually get a job in this market when they graduate. So Matt, thank you so much for being here. You are a co-founder and a lead instructor at Rithm School. So I think you're gonna be able to answer all of our questions, but if we just back up for a second, maybe first we can start with like, how did you get into tech? Did you take a traditional path into software engineering?
Sure. I would say semi-traditional. My background is not in engineering or computer science or programming. It is in math, though. So I did a bachelor's degree in math. I did a PhD at UCLA in math, but it was not applied math. I didn't know how to program. And after I finished my degree, I got a job working at a small math education startup. That was originally not a technical role. It was basically a content role. We were writing math lessons for middle and high school teachers. But we were a small team and technical needs sort of came up. And so while I was there, I sort of, with a coworker, we kind of pushed ourselves and taught one another how to code in JavaScript, which was really fun. And so I was at that job for about 3 years. But again, it was a small team. I was working remotely for a lot of it, and I kind of missed the energy of being in a classroom. So after a while, I started looking for new roles and found a job teaching web development at Galvanize. And so I started teaching web development in 2015. And when I was at Galvanize, that's when I met Ellie and Tim, who are the other co-founders of Rithm. And so we taught together at Galvanize, and then we started Rithm about 4 years ago. So I've been doing this ever since.
Cool. And so you're moving classes online for now. Do you plan for Rithm School to have a full-time remote immersive even once things, kind of quote unquote go back to normal?
Yeah, I mean, never say never. We're a very small team. So I think we have, 6 or 7 full-time employees. We've got like 5 full-time instructors. And so, right now, the plan is as soon as we can safely operate in person, we'll do that. Who knows what the future holds these days, but that's our plan for right now.
Right now, do you have students from outside of San Francisco who are taking Rithm School, or have you kind of kept it to California?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're seeing a lot more of that now because, the class that I'm in now is the first one that started remotely. And so we have a lot of times we'll have people who were in the Bay Area but have since fled or gone back to family and things like that. So we definitely have people who are on the East Coast. We have people who are in the Midwest. And so, yeah, we have people applying who are even international now. So, I think we'll see a lot more of that in the months to come.
It's kind of interesting to be able to open up like accessibility to folks outside of San Francisco, especially.
Yeah, that is one of the silver linings of this situation. Yeah.
So now we've been kind of, in the world of online learning for 4 or 5 months. What have you noticed about the most successful students that you've seen like really make this transition or be like really successful in the online classroom? Anything stand out?
I think in general, the things that contribute to student success are not so different from what we were seeing in person, but I think it's even more important now with people being remote. And I think, so for example, one of the most important things that I see from people who are really successful and really get the most out of the program are people who know how to advocate for themselves and are not shy about asking questions or communicating their needs, and just saying, you know, they're not afraid to stop in the middle of a lecture and say, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you say that again, or can you repeat, or just ask a lot of questions, right? Because it is, all of these programs are very concentrated in terms of how much time you have, and I want to make sure students get the most value out of that time. And so students who are really proactive in terms of getting the most out of us while they have access to us tend to be the ones who get the most out of the program.
I mean, one thing that's definitely different is just like being in a physical classroom, obviously. So do y'all have advice for students who are now like setting up a classroom in their homes? Like, what is there anything that you've noticed that successful students do? Have a really
I mean, it's definitely tough right now to have dedicated space, right? For folks who are able to dedicate a portion of their apartment or place where they're living and just say, okay, this is the place where I'm going to work, and set up a desk. Even for myself, you know, initially when we started quarantining, I was just sort of setting up like on top of a dresser, and I had a laptop there, figuring like, oh, well, maybe we'll be able to get back in person in a month or so. And so this is all temporary, but now I've had to, you know, invest more in sort of establishing a dedicated workspace at home. So the more you can have that dedicated workspace, the better. And then I think another thing is just being intentional about not cooping yourself up too much, right? Like making sure that when we take a lunch break that you go outside or do something to sort of break up the routine so that you're not just sitting alone in a dark room all day, which I don't think is good for anyone's mental health. So sort of doing those check-ins with yourself and making sure that you're getting time away from the computer, I think is harder to do when we're not in the same space.
And the teaching style, even in the remote classroom at Rithm School, is still like very much immersive, right? So students are joining at the same time.
Definitely.
Every day.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe that even is a little bit easier to take those breaks as opposed to like a self-paced or flex class.
Yeah. And we try to bake in breaks in the lectures. We're not going to talk at people for 2 hours straight, and we'll tell them to stretch and get some coffee and things like that.
Okay. So one thing that I kind of think of as integral to the bootcamp process is those like capstone projects, demo days, career like networking opportunities. So how have y'all figured out how to kind of ensure that remote students aren't missing out on those things that in-person students kind of get by default? How have you approached that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely pre-quarantine, right? We have a dedicated outcomes portion in our curriculum, which is about 3 weeks long. And traditionally during that time, that's when we've, you know, organized with different companies in the Bay Area to do tours or like gone to meetups together and things like that. And obviously that can't happen as much right now, but other aspects of it we can still do, right? So we also would have a lot of guest speakers come in and talk. We always have alumni panels so that you know, future job seekers can talk to people who've walked the same path. And then in terms of like capstone demo day stuff, one part of our curriculum that's a little unique is students spend 3 weeks. It's kind of like a mini internship working on a company project. So they get experience in a real world code base. And that can still happen remotely. So I think the biggest thing that we can't do now is just the in-person, you know, tours of other organizations and things like that. But everything else we can still do, fortunately.
In that mini internship, like students are working with a real company, like a real problem at a company?
Yeah, so that we partner with different organizations and students get to contribute to their code base. And again, when we were in person, basically the instructors serve the role as the sort of technical lead and engineering manager for that project. And so it's kind of a work environment, kind of a school environment, and people, you know, external stakeholders from those organizations will interact with students a bit, but and that still happens, right? So the biggest difference now is just that people are working at home instead of us being in school. But other than that, it's pretty much the same.
I imagine that actually might set people up nicely for, I imagine they're going into remote jobs after
Sure.
they graduate at this
Right.
time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
good practice.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so can you show us what the remote classroom actually looks like at Rhythm School? Maybe share your screen and give us a little
Sure.
tour.
Primarily, we rely heavily on Zoom, so it's a lot of Zoom. And like you mentioned, everything is still live. We don't do like self-guided learning. A big part of Rhythm is because we're so small, we really want to try and foster as much community as possible. And so that was true in person, and it's still true remotely. So we meet, if you look at the, on our website, we have these program details. This is basically like a high level overview of what the day-to-day looks like. And this is still true, right? So we all meet either 9:15 or 9:30, depending on which cohort you're in. We have morning lecture or activity, some kind of exercise. We all take lunch together at the same time. In the afternoon, we rinse and repeat some kind of new content or concept or something like that, and a new exercise. And so the expectation is people are all meeting together at the same time. We try to make the lectures interactive. We'll ask questions of the students. We hope they ask questions of us. All of the exercises, we do pair programming. So students are never sort of on their own. They're always working with someone else. And we also use Slack really heavily. So when people are working on a problem in Zoom, they have this like breakout room feature. So we can basically assign pairs to their own little mini room. And then the instructors can float around. So we can hop into their breakout rooms proactively and just see what people are working on, answer questions, give feedback. We're also on Slack. So, maybe if we haven't checked in on a group in a while and they're stuck on something, they can always reach out to us and say, hey, we're stuck, or hey, we think we finished, can we get a code review? So it's very engaged, right? People are never working on their own, essentially, because we're trying to capture as much of that in-person community aspect as we can, even though we are not together. So Zoom, Slack, those are our sort of primary communication tools. And then in terms of what these materials look like, again, it's all very similar to what we traditionally did in person. So I just have a couple of examples here. So in the first week of the program, this is one of our lecture decks. So every lecture has slides. It also has lecture notes accompanying the slides. When we were in person, we recommended that people would print out these lecture notes beforehand, and that way they could bring them into the lecture hall and just take notes on them. Nowadays, that's a little bit different, obviously, but we provide the lecture notes beforehand, and then during that lecture time, we just go through this content in slide format, right? And so we share our screen, we can hop into the console, we can do live demos of whatever. And we can, a lot for the later lectures, when we get into React or Flask or Node and Express, we have full-on like demo applications that students can download and play around with that accompany the lecture. So they get access to all this content the night before if they want to take a look at it early, or review it afterwards. Another silver lining to being remote is that we record all of our lectures. So with the expectation, again, is that people are there and around, but for folks who want to listen to the lecture another time, or they find it helpful for review, we provide recordings of all of the Zoom meetings as well. So that's a nice bonus for folks who have to do this not in person.
How do students pair program?
We break people into groups, and we basically we have a lecture the first day, which is sort of about the behavioral aspects of pair programming. So one person will drive, one person will navigate. The driver is the one who's actively coding, and the navigator is the one who's making suggestions, catching bugs, catching typos, sort of brainstorming with the driver when they're stuck or trying to figure out what to do. We use VS Code for our programming, and VS Code has this live share feature, which some students love. We don't mandate it because for some students it does seem like it's kind of a little bit buggy still. But for students who can work with LiveShare, it basically lets both pairs edit the same files at the same time, so they can sort of be more hands-on that way. And again, this is something that we would do in person as well. So even in person, we would pair program all the time. We would still talk about the roles of driver and navigator. I think it is important to give students practice not only in the technical curriculum, which we have a lot of technical curriculum, but also get them practicing the non-technical aspects of being an engineer, right? Like when you go out on interviews, you're not just being assessed on your technical capability, you're also being assessed on how do you communicate? How do you work on a team? Is this someone that they want to spend 40 hours a week with, right? So by emphasizing pair programming, we're hoping that students are also learning those skills as well.
Well, it seems like it's like a very organized curriculum. And then y'all are using Zoom and Slack for communicating with each other, and people are communicating like all day. It's not like an asynchronous kind of situation. Cool.
Yep.
Okay, so you've been doing this for about 4 months. Like, what has been the biggest lesson that your team has learned over the past few months? And have y'all made any changes or, iterated the way that you're doing online learning?
So that's, we've definitely learned a lot, I think. The nicest thing we've learned is, for 4 years, we were an in-person program. We really believe in the value of in-person learning, and we believe that the social aspect of learning is really important. And we also believe in small class sizes and all of that stuff. So our model of education is small. And so my biggest fear when we had to go online was that, the quality is just not going to be as good now. And I've been pleasantly surprised with how well things have been going. The first few weeks, obviously, there was a lot of learning, even with just the details of, like, how does Zoom work and how do we make pairing work and all of those sort of technical questions. But I would say we're capturing a lot more of the experience of the in-person program than I would have expected. And I think that is primarily because we're trying to do so much of the same things that we would have done in person. And the technology is allowing us to do a lot more than I thought we would have been able to, right? Like, I didn't know that Zoom breakout rooms were a thing until the quarantine hit. So that's been the nicest takeaway. I think other takeaways, one is that this is something I hadn't expected, but everything moves more slowly online. So like our lectures tend to take about 10 to 20% longer online than the same content takes in person. And I think one reason for that is that in person, it's much easier to just look at faces and get a read of the room, right? We can tell if people are looking confused or lost or having a hard time paying attention. It's easier for us. I mean, Zoom has great features so that students can let us know when they have questions and things like that. But I don't know. I think it's easier to get a temperature check on the room when everyone is in person. So we tend to be a little bit slower, a little bit more deliberate, and that means that the material takes a little bit longer to deliver. And that's true across all staff members. It's not just something that I've noticed about my own teaching. And so in terms of tweaks or changes, one thing we're going to start with this upcoming September cohort is we're basically adding on a week to the curriculum. So we're extending the program by a week, partially because the content is taking longer to deliver, and partially also because we want to be able to provide a little bit more support up front. So we're basically adding a week to the beginning of the program so that people who come in will have more time to get to know one another. We can also shorten the pre-work so that the expectations coming in are a little bit less, and students can spend more time learning together. Because again, I think that's where I think you'll get more effective learning when you're in a group than when you're on your own.
Those are really interesting observations. I didn't really think about it taking longer, but it makes perfect sense. Everything seems to take a little bit longer when you're doing things, trying to replicate the in-person experience online. So even just meetings. Cool. Well, so you mentioned that the small class size was a big part of Rithm School. How many people are in a class in these remote classrooms?
Yeah, so like in person, we've traditionally capped our classes at between 18 and 20, and so we haven't always even gotten classes that big. So like an in-person class of 15 is not atypical for us. And right now, our class sizes are slightly lower. I think probably 12 to 14 or so. And again, a lot of that is, some of that I think is just the time we're living in, right? It's a scary time to jump into an immersive program. And so I think people are a lot of people seem to be taking kind of a wait and see approach, right? Like, let me wait 3 months and see whether things are better. Let me wait 3 months and see whether it'll be in person again and things like that. So, but even online, I don't see us having a class that's more than 20 students.
Well, and then Rhythm School has a great history of getting students jobs. Obviously, it's a huge part of the program.
Yeah.
How has that changed? Like, are your students actually still landing jobs during the pandemic, or how is that going?
Yeah, so it's definitely more challenging now. I'm not going to lie about that. It's I think students are still getting interviews. Students are still getting hired. One thing we are noticing is, again, the processes are just slower, and especially now that it's the middle of the summertime, right? I think traditionally this time of year has seen a slowdown in hiring, and especially now with everything else that's going on, where students are in process with organizations that maybe would have gotten back to them in 2 or 3 days. Now it's taking maybe a week or a week and a half, and so a lot of those processes are slowing down. Obviously, too, right? Like some startups are having a hard time. So it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of what's going on in the industry. I know that Yelp recently unfurloughed a bunch of employees that they had furloughed, so there are definitely good signs. But yeah, it's a time of uncertainty for sure. So we have a career coach who works with students. Again, we have 3 weeks of outcomes curriculum, which is partially technical, but a lot of behavioral stuff as well. And then students work with our career coach one-on-one a lot during that time. And even after they graduate, they have one-on-one check-ins with our career coach until they find a job. So we're doing everything we can to support students as they're looking for work and trying to avoid quarantine fatigue while they do so.
Are you noticing anything about like the types of industries that Rhythm School graduates are going into, or anything there?
That's a good question. I think, we get students who get jobs from all over the map. There are a few organizations who have kind of consistently hired a handful of our graduates, and fortunately those organizations seem to be weathering the storm reasonably well and are still hiring. So, I think definitely any organization that's doing something with asynchronous communication, right? Like, I'm sure Zoom is doing fine right now. Slack is probably doing fine. Like, organizations that are providing tools to help people do their jobs remotely are going to help. Even for the company project portion, our students, we have a project right now that a bunch of students have worked on, which is basically it's intended to provide people who traditionally make a lot of their income from in-person events, like yoga teachers or fitness instructors or something, trying to help them find ways to monetize those skills online. So that's a project that a lot of students have worked on. So, tools that help in this time tend to be still hiring and still doing okay.
Cool. Okay, so one piece of advice that I'm hearing from you is like expecting or setting your expectations that the job search process is just going to take a little bit longer. Is there any other like recession proof job hunting tips that you've heard, any advice that you've heard from recent graduates or instructors about navigating this world?
Yeah, I think in general the advice that I give to job seekers is still holds true now, and is even possibly more true. Like, I think that sometimes students have this idea in their head that the person who gets the first job is going to be the one who is the most technically proficient, or the one who seems like the smartest one in the class, or something like that. And it's not usually that person. A lot of times it's someone who has the highest emotional intelligence, or maybe isn't the most comfortable networking and things like that. There are so many non-technical skills that are wrapped up in the job search, and I think students a lot of times undervalue those skills because they think, oh, I came here to learn JavaScript really well, and if I know JavaScript really well, then I'll be great. So really paying attention to the non-technical aspects of the job search is super important. And then I think the other thing that can be hard for students, especially coming like from a really structured environment like Rithm or any other school, that you have a daily schedule and you have assignments and expectations put on you, to being a graduate of those programs. And now all of a sudden, okay, the day is what you make of it, right? And for a lot of students, that transition can be hard. And we do our best to sort of help them navigate that transition. But I think students who are successful in the job search are ones who can make their own schedule, who can keep their own schedule, who really know how to structure their time and sort of treat the job search as a job, right? So they are consistently applying for work every single day. They don't get too emotionally attached to any one thing, because a lot of times we'll see students who find this job that they really want and they get really far, but then the company ghosts them or an interview doesn't go so well or whatever, and they're so devastated by that it kind of derails all their momentum. Because it does, I think too, especially now in times of quarantine, for a lot of students, it's quiet and not a lot happens. But then once stuff happens, it moves very quickly. So that people will apply and apply and apply and not hear anything for 2 or 3 weeks. But the ones who are consistent and keep applying, they're getting their resume out and out and out, and eventually they start getting feedback, getting interviews, and then it kind of snowballs from there. So the people who don't invest that time up front have a harder time getting that momentum, building that momentum, and then maintaining it.
That's really good advice. One trend that I feel like we've seen is just an uptick in interest in learning programming or changing careers into tech, especially because those are kind of the jobs that have been protected or have not been lost as easily during this time. That probably has something to do with like an influx in demand from folks who have lost their jobs in service industries, et cetera. But it's not like someone can just wake up, tomorrow and start at Rithm School. So how can those types of students take advantage of a program like Rithm School? Where should they start? Is there kind of a place for beginners that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the challenging things, I think, for people learning how to code. There's so much content out there, and it's hard to know what to do. And I see a lot of people who kind of dabble in a lot of different things, right? Like they go to Codecademy and they do some stuff there, and then they go to this other website and do some stuff there, and they learn a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit of Python and a little bit of Ruby. And it's a lot of breadth, but not a lot of depth. So I think one thing to just think about is figure out what you want to do. And that's a hard question to answer. But once you have a plan in place and you can think, okay, I want to go to an immersive program, Rithm or any other one, right? Really sort of tailor your self-study to what that program is doing, right? If it's a JavaScript program, then don't study Python and Ruby and other languages. You want to become the strongest candidate you can for that specific program. For us, we do have a ton of curriculum on our website here. I can share my screen real quick. So like people who apply to Rithm, we tell them, if you want to do a technical interview for Rithm, you should go through our Introduction to JavaScript course. You should read through this. There's problems in here. We also have a Replit classroom with a bunch of problems in there. So, right, this is relatively well organized, I think. We give you the basics of JavaScript. We teach you about functions. We teach you about arrays and numbers and all this stuff. We have exercises. So for people who are looking for... Yeah, so this is all free. We ask you to sign up for our mailing list, but other than that, it's free. And so, yeah, people can self-study here. We have other curriculum as well. If you want to dig deeper, there's basically an overview of everything we do in our in-person program, but the curriculum on the website is a bit older than what we do in our in-person, and there are other differences as well. But there's plenty of content here which we try to structure. So I'm a fan of it. I generally will tell people to come here, especially maybe they're interested in learning how to code, but they're not sure. This gives you a ton of different topics, or maybe you've heard of Node.js, but you don't know what it is. You can learn about it. You've heard of React, you don't know what it is. You can learn about it, things like that. So cool. Yeah, I'm a fan of our website, but obviously I'm biased as well.
Seems like a great place to start. Okay, well, finally, so you mentioned before, hearing this kind of wait and see mentality from applicants. And I would say this is kind of the number one question that we get right now is, why is this a good time for me to make a career change or go to a boot camp? And, is this even a good time? So what is your kind of take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's a challenging time, right? It's a scary time. It's a time of a lot of uncertainty, but I think there's also opportunity in this time. I think it is, software engineering jobs aren't going away. They are, fortunately, a job that you can do remotely. And so if this is our future for a while, I think that's really nice. And even once we've weathered this storm, there'll still be jobs that you can do remotely. And I think a lot of company culture will have changed because of this. And I think companies will be a lot more supportive of remote work. So if that's something you're interested in, I think this is a great time to get into engineering. Another thing I'll say is, this is certainly true pre-quarantine. The number of software engineers isn't going down. Right? There's always going to be graduates. There's always going to be people trying to get into the industry. And so the least competitive time to enter the industry is now. It's only going to get more competitive as time goes on. So even though it is a time of uncertainty, even though, companies are being a little bit more conservative, these jobs are not going away. And so now may be the right time for you, especially if you are looking to make a change.
Well, that is a fantastic perspective and also a great place to end. So thank you so much, Matt, for joining us and walking us through the Rithm School online classroom and sharing such great advice for anyone who's thinking about doing a bootcamp remotely. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Let us know in the comments which bootcamp you'd like to see a virtual classroom walkthrough with next. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.